So thanks everybody for joining us again. And as every Saturday, we have Josh Dickson, psychologist Josh Dickson, uh, to discuss different aspects of the psychological implications of the pandemic that we're now learning to live with. And today, Josh will be discussing how to prevent stress from becoming trauma. So, without further ado, Josh.
Thanks, Razzie. So what I've done is I've posted into the chat. It didn't come up quite how I had it in my, on my Word document. I hope it'd come out as bullet points, but I put down there the sort of what I see as the key processes that help avoid stress becoming trauma. Now, I think it's important to define some of these terms. So stress is when biologically you've got a lot of cortisol being released. It's when you have you're in basically usually in a high arousal state. It's a state that you want to get out of, but usually you can cope with it on a day-to-day, and then the level of the stress determines how much you're able to function or not. So and stress isn't in itself a bad thing. Stress is something that often moves action forward and can be a positive energy. But when we have too much stress, this can cause a belief that one is becoming hopeless, or can lead to depression. It can lead to something what we call learned helplessness, which is another model of depression. And trauma is really a state that there are basically two types of trauma that we really talk about in psychology. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which is usually the result of something that's happened to you. And I'm talking in quite basic terms right now, but think of PTSD as what's happened to you. And then we have developmental trauma, which you can think of as the things that didn't happen to you, neglect, and so on. But in general, events turn into trauma over time, or become traumatic when you can no longer cope with it in your mind. You can no longer reason, abstract, tolerate the emotions, etc. And then it leads to certain kind of symptoms. Now, trauma symptoms are usually, the main ones are avoidance behaviors. So the avoidance of thinking about an event or a subject or a situation. Avoiding any of the cues around that. So you might avoid certain streets or certain sounds or certain books or movies or certain people, etc. There can be symptoms such as flashbacks or intrusive images, intrusive thoughts. And what always goes with trauma is a sense of meaning. And it's a change of sense of meaning. So, for example, how you view the world and how it is. So for some people right now, like you may be starting to view the world as a more a less benign place. You know, you're starting to see civil liberties being trampled on, destroyed. You're starting to see, you know, the rise of the state in an ever increasing and expanding manner. You're starting to see I mean, I'm noticing sort of tremendous goodwill amongst people when I go out for walks and stuff at the moment. But I'm also sensing, you know, fraying on the edges. There seems to be a slight loss in, I have to say the police are doing one of the, in certain areas, are doing, nationally in the news anyway, a really poor PR effort at the moment. Not helped by the successes of social media now. It's very easy to I'm sure there are plenty of policemen doing a really good job, and all the police that I've seen out and about in the parks and stuff have been pretty reasonable, but there's some pretty heavy-handed policing going on from what I've seen online. So there's certain ways that all these events can really transform the way you see the world, and traumatic events do that. So to put it in really sort of basic terms, imagine that someone is at college and they are sexually assaulted by a man. And it's I'm afraid to say, sort of statistically, that's very likely that you're a woman, and this happens. If it's bad enough, and due to and however you define bad, but to you, and there is the element of maybe some prior traumatic history or stress, etc., a view of men might shift. So you might go from believing that, you know, some men are jerks and a lot of men are great, and so a lot of people are in between, to this, what will ultimately become an irrational belief of all men are bad, or all men are rapists, or all men are, and so on. That's a very sort of basic example of how one's meaning and how one sees the world can shift. So a lot of these things build up over time. Repeated events can cause the kind of avoidance, or one big huge event can cause trauma. We talk about big T trauma and small T trauma. Big T trauma being 9/11, being witnessing your friends, your comrade as a soldier standing on a landmine, it's being beaten up. It's these kind of big events. And then you can have small T trauma, which is kind of the drip constant of something that then can tip you over the edge. And I think that's more what we're going to be experiencing at the moment. Now, you know, for example, I'm quite anxious at the moment. I have my partner is on the front line in the hospital at the moment, and it didn't really hit me until she sent me a photo of her in all the gear, you know, all the not quite hazmat, but all the stuff. And it was like, whoa, that's pretty, you know, it made it much more serious to me. So I'm anxious about that. And I'm anxious about the fact that people in medicine, in the hospitals, etc., are getting hit quite hard. They're getting a very high viral load potential. So yeah, I have anxiety about someone who one of my top values in life is in danger, but also doing really good work. And also my mum got COVID, and she's now got a secondary lung infection. Now she seems to think she's okay. And when I speak to her on the phone, she seems okay. And maybe she is, but it is the nature of this virus at the moment. Seems that it lasts and lingers for a long time. And it seems to have at least two, you know, can have 2, 3, 4 waves. And so I'm concerned, you know, and these things could potentially become quite traumatic to me if I let them. And there are certain things that I need to do. And I always think it's important to make these things concrete so that you can understand and relate to what I'm talking about here. Now, there are all sorts of things that all of you can do and extrapolate from this to make things, to manage the stress so that it doesn't turn to overwhelm, and therefore you can keep functioning. You can stay within what we call your window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is like, when you are within your window of tolerance, you can still operate while tolerating any kind of thought, any kind of body sensation, any kind of feeling. And it's when we get tipped out of the window of tolerance that we become traumatized and either become hyper-aroused, which is fight, flight, and freeze, or hypo-aroused, which is dissociated or submissive. If you get tipped out of that, there's not much you can do once you're tipped out. But we want to manage where we are on the edges of that window of tolerance. Now, if you keep getting stressed, that window will just keep going down like that. So we need to have a whole load of interventions, techniques, etc., to keep our window as wide as possible. And the research after 9/11 was incredibly helpful for this, because when you interview people after a day after 9/11 who had been in, say, downtown Manhattan, etc., 98% of people interviewed displayed or reported PTSD symptoms, but it didn't mean that they all had PTSD. A month later, about 10%, 10 to 13% reporting PTSD symptoms. So there is a natural healing process that goes on in most people. But there will also be lots of things that people were doing, and there are also a lot of things that people weren't doing that can mitigate and bring on kind of traumatic symptoms. And one of the sort of most key finding is that those people who maybe had witnessed what had happened maybe in real time, or down there and seeing the towers collapse, etc. Or you could, a whole host of situations that you can imagine that were pretty traumatic on that day. Those who went home to loving families and had partners, etc., had a much lower rate of PTSD than people who went home alone and were living alone. And what they found is that those people who were able to go to a supportive place, talk about what was going on, and just feel safe, that has a calming effect on the nervous system. I mean, if you think about it, you just go, like, if you're around trusted, loving people, in most situations, we tend to calm down. If you're on your own and you're not getting that support, you're much more likely to stay in a more highly aroused state. So right now, a lot of us are in isolation. We only really have the opportunity to nod at people in the street and in the shops if you go there, and through medium like this. So one of the most important things you can do for de-stressing is actually connect with those people that you value, and just check in with them and let people know how you're doing, and be totally honest about that. None of this kind of like stiff upper lip, keeping it all inside. That sort of stoic attitude really does not help with this. But the key point there is that continuous contact, I've written here, with, and support from important people in your life, those people that you really value. You know, there's certain people that it would be crazy for me to try and get support and care and love from. Just, you know, it would be totally ineffectual. And so be very clear in your mind who it is that would be able to offer that support. And sometimes it's just like having a laugh, etc. And sometimes it's having someone that you can trust to tell and say, hey, maybe I'm a bit scared, or I'm a bit bored, or I'm a bit worried, or whatever it is. But having that continuous contact, not trying to be like the sort of superhero, I can do this all on my own and be absolutely fine, because it really doesn't work that way. You need other people. I mean, Chip Semihai's work on the value of other people, I've always found incredibly useful, because he showed that even simple interaction with someone on the street asking for directions requires a huge amount of cognitive skill and interactive skill. And when you are isolated on your own, if you don't keep using those skills, you can quite quickly unwind. You can it leads to rumination very, very quickly. There are some people who argue that we have a negativity bias, and that can only be accented on your own. It's very easy to just get caught up in either woe is me or just going down. I mean, the thing that I have to keep checking at the moment is I have to keep stopping myself going on Twitter too much, because Twitter is really great for really up-to-date information, but it's also about the most negative sphere I've ever known in my life. But I can get caught up in that a bit. I mean, if I click on something and then I look at some of the comments, I'm sort of almost ashamed to be a human being. You know, it's like, yeah, words can't describe some of the things that are going on there. And I have to be really careful with that, and being able to laugh about that and see some of you smiling and laughing about that makes me feel a bit better. You know, it's that some of that shared experience. So continuous contact with and support from the important people in your life is essential for de-stressing. Then the next stage really is learning how to disclose. So I've written disclosing the trauma to loved ones, but just disclosing your stress, disclosing what's going on, and maybe, you know, that what that does is it helps diminish shame. Shame is we often talk about in group therapy that shame dies on exposure. And because often it comes when you share something like your shame or your trauma or what it is you're really struggling with, often that sharing experience can help frame it in a much more objective light. you can often say, oh, I can't believe I was thinking this and I was bored and I couldn't get on with things. And this is what I keep hearing from a lot of people at the moment. I'm really struggling to motivate myself, and hear someone else that you really respect saying, yeah, me too. It's been quite hard actually at the moment. And it's like, oh, because there's often, people will often try and make themselves terminally unique in these kind of situations. So just sharing your experience and disclosing what's going on with the people that you trust and love really, really does help lower your heart rate, and it builds up that sense of trust. If you don't feel safe, it's very hard to process difficult and troubling information. This is just a fact. So the safer you can feel, and the safer that with the people that you're with, the more likely you are to be honest and open, and in that will be a de-stressing effect. I've written here, identifying yourself as a survivor as opposed to a victim. It'd be very easy right now to slip into victimhood. I'm being persecuted by the state, I'm being persecuted by society, all these sorts of things. And yet, yes, some of these things are, there's definitely a basis to some of this, but it's how you frame it is really important. If you fall into victimhood, a victim believes that they have no choice, and a victim believes that they have no options. And that's something that I think has to be challenged all the time. And I know that Razzie and I are talking about potentially doing a talk at some point, maybe with someone else as well, to discuss optimism and what optimism is, and how it could really help in kind of the situation we're going through right now. Because it'd be very easy to be incredibly pessimistic right now. It doesn't look good in terms of how long this is going to go on for, and it doesn't look good in terms of what's going to happen with the economy and all sorts of things. But identifying yourself as a survivor and looking at the assets, and to be a survivor either often isn't just about luck. Being a survivor is about what you've brought to the situation, what assets and skills, and taking pride and recognizing those are a really important part of getting through and de-stressing. If you identify as a victim, that's going to really stress you out, because then you are at the mercy of all events and everything that's out there. So really, that's challenging your thinking. I've also written here the use of positive emotion, laughter, etc. We spoke about that a lot last week, and I think, or the week before. Positive emotion, the use of what I would describe as, so those who weren't there, I'd point you to look up and Google savoring, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's work on savoring. But the re-experiencing of positive emotion is a massive de-stressor, releases all sorts of chemicals like serotonin and oxytocin, etc., and DHEA, which is, you can think of DHEA as like the opposite of cortisol, the cortisol being the stress hormone and DHEA being the rebuilding hormone. If you engender and connect and generate a lot of positive emotion, that will de-stress you, and therefore you will not then much less likely to become traumatized. So for example, today my brother, who is very good for humorous stuff, sometimes it's a bit much for me, gave me a podcast today, and I was walking around the park in the sunshine, and I was laughing out loud with my headphones in, and it felt great. It felt great to be able to just laugh out in that sort of free, nice breeze by the river, sunshine, didn't care what anyone thought or saw. There's this guy just laughing out loud with headphones in. I really enjoyed it, and it had such a sort of profound effect on my whole psyche and on my body. I just felt really, really good. And while I was laughing and feeling good, I wasn't stressing or anxious or anything like that. I was totally distracted from what's going on. And I think it's important to have positive distraction techniques during these kind of situations. So really try and engender as much positive emotion as possible. And so just really quickly to avenues for that: savoring, gratitude lists, gratitude letters, blessings journals. The blessings journal is one of those powerful things you can do, which is at the end of the day, you write down 3 things that went well for you and why. I know I talk about this a lot, but it's a very powerful exercise, and it produces a lot of positive emotion. Finding positive meaning in the trauma now, or in the stress that you're going through. This is Miriam Akhtar did a lot of good work on. She's got a lovely little book called Post-Traumatic Growth, and what is post-traumatic growth. And the main pioneers of post-traumatic growth are a couple of psychologists called Tedeschi and Calhoun. But what they really are pointing at and looking at is like, how can we find some kind of positive meaning in the stress or trauma that you're going through? And this requires a cognitive restructuring or reframing, or just a really good analysis or inventory of what's going on. What am I bringing to this that's of value, and what virtues am I practicing that I can be proud of here? So have I used this time constructively? Am I being disciplined? Are there certain things that I'm achieving in spite of this, etc.? And there's a lovely analogy by a psychologist called Stephen Joseph called the broken vase analogy. And the broken vase analogy, I've always found it quite powerful. I think a lot of people can identify with the fact that we have seen in our lives, either parents or grandparents or in museums, etc., old vases. And you can often see an old vase that's very cracked and chipped, and it's been put back together, and it still looks pretty, but you know it's got a big crack in it, and you know that if you put water in it, it's going to leak, etc. And this is one of the issues that a lot of people keep trying to do, is they keep trying to rebuild what they've got exactly the same as it was. So, for example, and not really recognizing the reality of the situation. And I know that when I see that vase, it looks very pretty, but I also know that I'm going to have to carry, it's going to be incredibly fragile. And every time you try and rebuild exactly as you were before, think of that vase and how fragile it ends up becoming, even if it looks nice. It's delicate and can break at any moment. And what Joseph says is that you can take that vase and you can break it and you can turn it into like a really beautiful mosaic. You're turning it into something new that has its own integrity and it has its own strength, and it's come from what was before, but it's something new in itself and important and has strength and direction and focus. That's its own new thing. And I've always found that analogy very powerful. That's the best analogy I think I've seen for what we call post-traumatic growth. It's like, okay, it's a recognition that the situation is very different now, and I have to create something new out of what was there before, not just continually trying to rebuild something from the past. And that's what having that framing technique as a principle of working through these sorts of things could be very powerful in mitigating and working through stress, because then you've got hey, I'm going to use this situation right now to create something new. So let's just say that like we're in lockdown for a while and Razi is like, oh my God, I can't do all these meetups. I can't do X, Y, and Z. But through that, you create something really cool online like this. And maybe you take it somewhere further with this. And then when the situation changes again, you can integrate this as part of what you do and the whole thing. And that, I don't know whether that's a good idea or not right now, but I'm just trying to make a point there that possibility is out there. And that's a framing, that's a way of framing the situation to be something positive in the future. So then I've written here, helping others in their healing process. It's not helping others out of a sense of duty or altruism. It's helping others because they're of value to you. And often the sharing of an experience is of value to yourself as well. So it's like a trader principle. it's like a mutual benefit thing here, is that when I help and others who I trust and want to help and value, just maybe even just having a phone call to check in and see how they are, I often feel good for it. And I know that sometimes they feel good for it as well. And that has a very de-stressing effect. But again, like going back to the beginning of continuous contact with your support team or the people who are important in your life, but choose people. So there are people right now who are probably loving this lockdown and loving the fact they're not working, and or think that they're loving it, and they would be totally inappropriate. But for me to reach out to, I need to reach out to people. Like, I've got a friend at the moment I'm checking in with every day, because we work in a similar field, we do certain things together, we value each other a lot, and just that checking in each day to see how you're doing, etc. I think is mutually incredibly beneficial for both of us, and I always feel less stressed at the end of the call than beforehand. Then I've written here, holding the belief that you can manage your feelings and cope. One way to do that is actually to look back at all those times in your life, like, where have I coped? Where have I been able to manage? And really making a list there. And what I always emphasize the importance of writing and the importance of making lists in these kind of areas, because it comes down to how much we can hold in working memory, in our crow, that the more you write out, the less you have to hold in mind at the time, and therefore you can draw upon these examples, if you've got them written out, etc., to give yourself a lift and a boost, and use as evidence to counter any potential negative thinking that's going on in the situation. So, when did you cope before? What was the situation? How did you cope when you were a kid? How did you cope last week? How did you cope yesterday? How did you cope when you were in other situations that were maybe difficult? Have you lost a job before in the past? How quickly did it, and what skills did you bring to get back up on your feet, etc.? Really bringing focus into these areas will often really help change or challenge any negative thinking that maybe you're slipping into. I'm noticing it during this experience that and I think I said this last time or the time before, I'm pretty good for about 5 days. And then the 6th day, I have a bit of this was really like, this is getting to me a bit. And then I have to go through a little bit of extra work, and so on. Then I've written, reduce your cognitive load. This is something I've been learning about a lot recently, actually, is when you are have a to-do list, for example, in the morning. I often have a to-do list during the week of some of the things that I need to do: email this person, talk to that person. Currently, I'm still trying to get my reimbursement from Ryanair, things like that. If you start a task, let's say you got 3 things to do that morning, and you start a task and you only get through half of that first task, and you think, no, I've got to move on to the next one now, you will be dragging into that something that we call cognitive load. You'll be dragging into the second task a whole load of background noise around the first task, and that makes operating and trying to do the second task much harder. So if, let's say, you had 3 tasks to do and you did half of each, that's much less efficient than doing 1 or 2 and leaving one of them, because of this concept of cognitive load, that you have this resonance of the first task always interfering in the second, etc. And so a lot of the research shows is just get the first thing done and then move on to the second one. Because when you have a whole load of tasks open that you think, I can do a bit of that, and I can do a bit of this one, I can do a bit of that one, that becomes incredibly stressful to hold in mind, because it really taxes the working memory. So when your bandwidth is full up with these different tasks, that's when often you become very stressed. But if you can break down everything you need to do into smaller and smaller tasks and goals, it becomes much easier to do. In the same way that a marathon runner will often only think about the next mile, They won't think about the whole of the race. And that way they can focus on that next mile. Try and bring that kind of thinking and that operating into all your tasks during the day. And that hugely reduces stress. And one of the huge mistakes, I'm currently doing the OAC, or just finished year one in the OAC, which is the Objectivist Academic Center. I think that's what it stands for. And I really enjoyed doing that course. And I had a stunt that I had to do over the week and a day. But I've learned from this. I also started another course in January, and the overlay of those two things became very stressful because I was trying to hold two things in mind a lot of the time, and I was carrying over a huge amount of cognitive load from one to the other and back and forth and back and forth. And I've learned from that I'll never do that again. I will do one and finish it well and then move on to the next one, because holding those two things very stressful. If you are struggling in that kind of work area around things that you value, then I really suggest making a values hierarchy and sometimes cutting out some things that maybe you think you want to do, but you're not sure. So operating and creating a sort of structured values hierarchy is really good for de-stressing. Because when you can de-stress, you're most likely to become overwhelmed. And when you become overwhelmed, you start to have these beliefs that you're helpless. And when you fall into the sort of helplessness spiral, that's when you really can ease very quickly into depression. And then depression and trauma and these things go hand in hand. And so we want to have some skills of reducing any area that's going to lead to a sense of helplessness or beliefs in that ballpark. Something that I haven't written on the chat, which is a really important thing of de-stressing, is exercise. And the studies show that the quickest way out of any form of depression or depressive thinking, etc., the fastest way to boost your mood is through exercise. The downside with exercise is that it doesn't, if I go for a run or a long walk or a bike ride, etc., it's not really doing any kind of cognitive reframing. But what it does do is it brings me back into the moment. It brings me back into the day. It releases some, I feel much better for a while, and then use that post exercise bliss or the runner's high or whatever it is that you get as an avenue or a window to then start making some changes. If you need to make the changes, but in terms of an immediate intervention to de-stress yourself, exercise is by far, from my experience and a lot of the research, the best and quickest way of de-stressing. Sleep is essential, eating well is essential. All these things are important. I think a lot of people know these sorts of things anyway, but I think that the things that I've written there are probably, and in order, some of the most important ways of managing stress so that it doesn't lead to a place where you become helpless. Because it's often the sense of helplessness that is the most traumatic aspect of trauma when you interview people. It's when people believe they're stuck, have no choice, nothing's going to change. That's often the most terrifying for people. So we need to have sorry, I'm quite tired now. We need to have techniques and things to do, to constantly do, and have a routine. These things are essential to allow yourself to have a much clearer focus, to allow yourself to have allow yourself to focus on and define clear goals. All those sort of things come together in a de-stressing process, as well as sleeping well, eating well, exercising, having the ability to reframe the situation, allowing yourself to see things from many different angles, having this idea that post-traumatic growth is something that can happen, using things like the broken vase analogy to help you as a useful metaphor to get you through. identifying yourself as a survivor, really trying to avoid any victimhood, as easy as that would be right now. I think there was a on a HBL post recently, someone was referencing Leonard Peikoff, is that, yeah, you have to acknowledge sometimes that the world is crazy, irrational, etc., and then just get on with your life anyway. Put that to aside sometimes. Helping others who you value as part of the healing process as a de-stressor, because you value them, they value you. There's a mutual trade-off there. And reducing the cognitive load is just an amazing tool no, it's not a tool. It's an amazing observation of how our consciousness works. And the dragging over of other tasks into the current task is really debilitating. So I found that incredibly useful. And so I think maybe that's a good time to stop my monologue. That's what it feels like on the Zoom calls, that I'm sort of talking to you and sort of talking at a screen. And maybe we can open it up to some questions. Maybe there are other things that people want to share. Hope you got some value from that. I hope there are some certain parts of that you can use or take forward, or we can expand upon. And I put it over to you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Russ.
Josh. That was great. And yeah, we do have some hands raised, so it is going to become more of a dialogue. But I did want to ask before we move to the Q&A, you mentioned a psychologist who did some work on the value of other people, and I think he's Hungarian, but he has this name.
Yeah,
Can you type his name in the chat? Because if anybody wants to Google him,
yeah, I will. Yeah, Csikszentmihalyi, Hungarian American, wrote his best book is Flow. In objectivism, there's often a lot of talk about other people, and why other people are important is because we value them so highly. We value their thinking, we value their company, we value how they look, we value all sorts of things about other people, and that's really important. I like Csikszentmihalyi looks at it from a slightly different angle, and it's not an either or etc. He's just looking at it through a different lens. Is that other people are incredibly important to us in our ability to sort of refine and keep our mind sharp. And I think that's sort of it's another way of looking at why other people are so important to us.
thanks.
Cool.
Our first question is from Nikki. You're unmuted.
Yeah, well, I was curious about like when Josh was saying about was it? I think the big T in post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah, with like because I've got a friend who's one of her friends died of the coronavirus. So I was like wondering, is the impact of people losing any friends to the coronavirus, like any friends dying of the coronavirus kind of thing, likely to cause the big T or post-traumatic stress disorder?
Definitely. Absolutely, definitely. So that's something that it's a really good point and a really good question, is that, a lot of us are probably going to come across people who are going to be deeply affected by this in one way or another, either through dying or knowing of someone is dying, or it seems like this is a pretty nasty virus for certain people, and some people are very affected by. There seems to be a lot of people getting a lot of lung damage from this as well. And then also remember there's going to be a lot of vicarious trauma. People are watching certain things on the TV or hearing about things. And a lot of work that I do, I work with someone who's deeply traumatized, but their brother died, and they didn't witness their brother dying, but they heard about how their brother had died. And I think the press at the moment, my personal observation of the general right now, I think they love this, and they're loving this in quite a sick way, and they're really ramping up what's going on. People are drowning in their own lungs, and all sorts, and they're dying on their own, and I think there's a lot of truth in some of that as well, from what I'm hearing. And that that's what that has an impact on people. It's known as vicarious trauma. It's trauma through either hearing about or witnessing something. And it's very important to recognize that. And I think a lot of people are going to be affected by the economic disaster that looks like it's coming from this as well. And then there are a lot of other people I'm hearing who are, being deeply affected by the fact that they've had their cancer treatment cancelled, or they've had their operation put back, or that, there's going to be so many other effects from this that they could easily become those big T traumas if you're not careful. Something else that I didn't say earlier, but some of the really important things are, don't forget that the body holds all the stress. So we have to do things with our bodies to release stress so that we don't become too frozen or clammed up. So things like yoga, Tai Chi, exercise, all these sorts of things are really important for de-stressing the body as well. So someone who is going through like what you're talking about right now, the work, there's no point trying to do anything immediately. People need to go through that shock phase and see it's what happens, say, in a month's time. And in a month's time, it's to encourage exercise, it's to encourage talking about it, it's to encourage, there's going to be a lot of COVID support groups, and there's going to be all sorts of things around this that will be really important. It's isolationism that is the real issue, that it often leads to trauma. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, I think that was cool. That was interesting. Yeah.
Okay. If it's not, just ask me more. It's fine.
Next question is from Nikos.
Thanks. So, Josh, I want to push you a bit.
Yeah, please do.
Not in terms of I know more, and obviously not on a scientific base, on like a personal level. Yeah. So I want to push you a bit on this mention that what you said about stoicism, that actually shame dies on exposure, and that quite often stoicism is not the way to go. But I will give you an example in which there's no trauma, but it's basically the lack of stoicism that is the thing that kind of troubles me. And an example was, so some years ago, I volunteered for the Special Corps in the Greek army.
Yeah.
And the basic training, it was a very overwhelming experience. So actually, let me reverse engineer. When I finished it, it was one of the things I'm proudest for in my life. But while it lasted, it sucked so much that at some point I completely collapsed mentally. Okay, not collapsed, but I almost gave up. You know how with the Navy SEALs you put down the thing, but the thing is, on that Special Corps you can't do that. So you can't give up basically. Even if you give up, you stay in the barracks. So I went to a family member who had some pool and said, "Sorry, I can't do it. Please do whatever you can to take me out of there." And this is the thing which is now kind of a stain in my consciousness. So I'm so proud that I did it, but I feel very ashamed for the fact that I didn't do it 100%. And at some point I want to give up. And I'm asking you because I can see in retrospect that maybe, for example, I want to go to Greece and my family also wants me to go there. But the thing is, if I go there, I objectively put them more in risk. So if I go there, I do it out of weakness. And I realize what you say, I'm going to feel safer there. But here's a guy who's 37, and he's going to do something which in the future, even if no one gets, the virus or whatever, suddenly it's an issue of, not of shame, but look, I didn't stood up in the occasion. So that's why I'm not sure that shame dies in exposure. I would say the opposite, that shame lives forever. Whereas if you take the stoic, let's say, position, then in 2 years' time or in 3 years' time, you look back at this and say, at that time, I did exactly what I would want my ideal self, let's say, to do. So that's my comment / question.
So what is the actual question though?
So the question is, what if shame is actually the thing to be worried about? Because in the future, you'll be ashamed for the fact that you were not the superhero.
Shame is a disastrous emotion if it's allowed to fester. There's no question about that. But so shame, if you do something about it, there's a correct. So maybe what I should have said earlier is that shame dies on exposure, or the bringing out of one's shame is the first stage. There needs to be a corrective experience as well that goes with it. But often, we see a lot of in treatment, a lot of people in drug addiction treatment, a lot of people will have maybe stolen some money off their mother or something, and they feel deeply ashamed about it. But the revelation of that to the group often is incredibly helpful as the first stage of changing behavior. Hey, I'm being honest and open here. I'm letting you into who I am, so I can start changing who I am. And that's why working with shame and exposing it is often so important. Also, most people, when they reveal something, it's like they've been holding on to a dirty secret, and allowing that out is again one of the first stages of changing, and is really important there. Now, something that I was going to say when you were talking about doing and it didn't go quite where I thought you were going to go, when you were talking about doing was it a commando thing, a special forces thing, is it's really important to acknowledge that when we're doing these horrendous things that you're incredibly proud of afterwards, and you have to use some of these, maybe you might call it stiff upper lip skills or something when you're doing that, is that you always know that those situations are time framed. You know that there is an end to it, so you can use all that energy to get to the end. It's when we're in situations where we don't have a time, like right now, or when you're being tortured, or in an abusive relationship, or certain things, when there isn't that time frame, that's when it becomes very traumatic and incredibly stressful. There's a big difference between putting yourself through something incredibly stressful but knowing it's going to end, versus being in a situation that's incredibly stressful and having no idea when it's going to end. And a lot of the resilience techniques that people are taught in, say, yoga and mindfulness, etc., are you go through something very uncomfortable, but you know it's time framed, and that helps teach and boost resilience. But in terms of what you were saying there, I think it's always really important to acknowledge the difference between those two situations. When you know that there is an end, it's very different to when you just haven't a clue.
Can I ask a very short follow-up on that?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So I will insist a bit on the superhero part, because a mechanism that I've found helping myself is asking, it's a cliche and I realize it's stupid. Yeah, but there's this almost meme out there which says, if this was a movie, would you like to be the hero of the movie, or the guy who disappears in the first 20 minutes? So I will insist, isn't there something very powerful and virtuous in actually being the stoic superhero, take it to the chin, even in this occasion where there is no end? Because if not for anything else, in the future, it will be a thing that you will look back and you will be proud.
Yeah, but would you be proud if you didn't do some of these things and you ended up in a depressed, traumatic state, or you did it? There's a lot of context here. But I'm just sort of talking about a lot to do within your day-to-day, not in the big overall theme of getting through this. But I think it's heroic to look after yourself, to practice self-care, to know your limits, and work focused at your best. And if you can do that, then you're not going to be so stressed. And that, I think, those, when we think of a movie, or we think of a novel, we're accenting the essentials. Yeah, you don't see Superman having a massage or whatever it is, do you? But to function, you don't see your sports heroes going through all those things that they need to do, the mundane day-to-day disciplined actions that they do, that you need to do to maintain your resilience, etc. So I would, I think a lot of people, a good bit of therapy really helps a lot of people, but it doesn't make good copy. Does that make sense?
I would just want to say for once more, thanks to Josh, because I think we're getting a lot of, I mean, I'm taking a lot of value from these things. And yeah, so thank you. It was a good answer, but also it was a thank you for the general.
Cool, thank you.
So my question, you mentioned how important it is to have sort of a support network, to have
Yeah.
3 or 4 people that you're very comfortable with and you talk to maybe daily. Or what if the 3 or 4 people closest to you, let's say one is going crazy, being stuck at home all day, and another is super worried about losing their job or did lose their job, and another is sure that they're about to get the virus, and basically your best option for a support network are people who would probably bring you down in a situation like this.
Well, that's why I did start by saying that they have to be the right people for you and are going to be supportive, not parasitical. But are they? I'm not even sure that's a word, but parasites. And I'm not saying that they are parasites, by the way. But what I'm saying is, are they draining something for you, or is this time when they have been of value to you and supportive to you in the past, and it's your turn to pay them back for what they've already given you, etc. So bear that in mind, but also choose the right people for what it is you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, look around. But also you never underestimate how helping someone else can make you feel good if you value them and they're of value to you. Being of worth to someone can be really helpful to your psyche and to how you feel.
Somebody in the chat asked a follow-up, what if I don't have close people?
What if you don't have close people? I mean, then try and find the people that you trust the most to start doing this. Or maybe a forum like this is a great start for that. You have to, but I say you have to work hard at these things. These things you earn the people that you love and value through your own actions, etc. And you have to find the right people. It requires a lot of effort. Now, sometimes people are unlucky and stuff. I'm not saying that it's through your own fault that you don't have them, but it's maybe this is the time to use to really reflect on. And those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago, I talked about all the different kind of resources you can use, and never underestimate the power of good fictional resources. Larger than life characters who can inspire and keep you going through while you search for those people to support you. But most people have a few friends and some family members who they can rely on, even if it's only in part. I might go to Razi to talk about certain things, and I might want to speak to Nikos about certain other things, and so on. It's about managing your expectations of other people as well.
This situation has something very unique. So someone brought it up in the discussion with Claire on Monday. So normally, this thing of coming together would be obviously the thing to do in a crisis. And actually, that's what saved Greece from the financial crisis, the networks, the ties, the stuff. But now we find ourselves in the peculiar situation when physically you're discouraged from being close to people. Yeah. And a lot of people saying that this was Italy's one of the main problems, that everyone is close together, which means everyone was passing the virus to everyone else, and this. So is there a way around that? So I'm sure you'd prefer not to see your partner from Zoom, but at the same time, if you would be closer, you'd be like, oh, now am I exposing her? Am I not exposing her? So how do you get out of this conundrum that on the one side, you want to be closer to people, but this is literally a factor that adds risk to your beloved ones and to yourself?
Yeah, it's a stressful situation, this area of it. And so at the moment we have to use our phones, and we have to use Zoom, and we have to I've been training in the park a couple of days a week with my brother, and so we're meeting, but we're 2 meters apart, and we're like, he keeps getting too close to me, and I keep saying, back off, get away from me. We laugh about it, but in a way I'm being serious as well, because I know that he lives by my mum, and he drops off stuff to help mum out because they live next to each other, and she's vulnerable, and so on. No, it is a unique situation here. I'm taking a lot of comfort and value from just the benevolence that I'm seeing from neighbours and people in the street who normally, London, is not known for being the most friendly city in the world. But I'm noticing people are just being so nice from a distance. I'm walking down the street and we're sort of walking around each other like this and stuff, keeping our distance, but people are sort of smiling and saying, hey, and hope you're okay, and thank you. And I'm taking a lot of comfort from that. I really seeing how nice a lot of people are and how much they're valuing themselves and other people. And that, but yeah, it is really difficult because this isn't the same as much as I'm enjoying doing these talks and being involved. It's not the same as being in the flesh, because it's kind of two-dimensional. Everyone's small. I'm only really seeing your faces. I'm not picking up on all the body language. There's a lot of comfort and value in touch. Even shaking someone's hand or giving someone a hug or a high five and all these sorts of things. They feel good. It's good for you. It's difficult. Yeah, we're saving each other by disconnecting from each other. So we have to try and connect with each other the best we can through the other means. Yeah, like this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not even talking about intimacy. Like, try to think when was the last time where I did this with a guy, because you remember for a period we said no handshakes, we do this thing, which that's kind of my thing anyway. It's probably already a month. It's weird anyway.
Yeah, and then we had to do that. yeah. And
that's like Muay Thai.
Yeah, and now it's like saying hi with your feet, kicking each other's feet.
That's already too close. I'm not going there.
That's what people are doing as well. It's like, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I think it's making people realize how important these things are for living. I dropped something off at my mum the other day, and it's weird not being able to give her a hug or a kiss or something. It's just like, and you're like, we're like in the early arc of a weird zombie film or something. We're not allowed to do all these things, or it feels like a weird comic.
Do you think that after this we're going to be very different? Like, we're all going to be a bit more intimate, a bit more warm?
I think for a while. Some people, yeah, for a while.
For a while, right.
Yeah. I think if they find a vaccine and stuff like that, then I think it will go back very quickly to how it was. But if there isn't, I think we also need to find out what the actual figures are for all of this.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, if anybody has a question, now is the time to raise your hand. And while people consider doing that, if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to join the next event live, Josh is going to be here every Saturday for the foreseeable future, as long as we are all stuck at home. So there's a link in the description. You can join the London Ayn Rand meetup and sign up to all our events other than Saturday events with Josh. We also have panel discussions on Mondays and Wednesdays. There is a question in the chat. Could you discuss box breathing?
Oh yeah, good question. So box breathing is a way of building up your tolerance. And it's actually quite useful right now, building up your respiratory tolerance. So what you do, it should be called square breathing, but for some reason it's called box breathing out there in the ether. And all it is you start training yourself to go around an imaginary square with your breath. So you might breathe in for 3 seconds round one side, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. And then you move up to 4 and you go round. And then you go up to 5 and you go up as far as you can get. And it often becomes quite uncomfortable. But what you're doing is you're teaching your body to cope with uncomfortable breathing while at the same time increasing your lung capacity. So this morning I got up to 19. It took about 20 minutes because you go around slowly and you're doing seconds and stuff. And I couldn't nearly do that a few months ago. So it's a really good way of increasing lung capacity. And it's also a very good de-stressing tool, because when you're focusing on breath work, it's almost impossible to think about anything else. And that, if you just even practice breathing in for 4 and out for 4, in for 4, out for 4 or 5 seconds, and you just focus on that, it's almost impossible to think of anything else. So therefore you can't think about the things that are making you anxious, etc. But box breathing is a very good resilience tool, and I recommend people try it. It's quite a good way of getting to sleep as well, because the counting and going around quite distracts the mind, and then you drift off. Angela says in the chat there needs to be a herd immunity. I think that's what everyone hopes for, and I think a lot of people are hoping that many of us have already had it. There's a lot of sort of evidence coming out of Germany and Iceland and stuff that a lot more people may have had this than the models are currently showing.
There's another chat question. So what about excess drinking, eating, smoking weed out of boredom? How to avoid?
Well, the simplest answer is don't do it, but that's not a very helpful answer for people who attempt it. What is it? You have to ask yourself, if you're smoking weed, drinking, overeating, etc., that's actually quite a strong stimulus against something else. So ask yourself, really, what is it that I am self-medicating here? And allow yourself to really acknowledge and look at that first, because there are plenty of other ways of changing the way you feel that don't need that kind of self-medication. For example, if you go for a run instead, get the runner's high that way, and so on. It's very the problem with drink and drugs and sugar is, in very, very short moderation, they work, but they when you're using any of those things to really change the way you feel, or create a sort of change of consciousness, changing your state, you're always caught with that nagging feeling, or that nagging belief that I didn't deserve this, I didn't earn this change in my consciousness. And that is often what causes a lot of distress with those things, because they give you a temporary reprieve, but then there's always a consequence as well, and there's always a suffering that goes with that. But it's hard, like it's hard being trapped, and I understand why there's a temptation sometimes to zone out and block out. Okay, Nikos says, yesterday I did no exercise in martial art training, first time in days. Instead, sitting most of the day and ended up with a cigarette, proper one, not weed. It was the most depressing lockdown day. Yeah, I bet. And one thing I'm having to do is I'm exercising a lot, and I'm having to remember to take the rest day. It's important to do that as well, because a good friend of mine, she's a doctor. She's a professional athlete as well, big, Ironman and all those sort of things. She got COVID really badly, and has been doing a sort of video diary of it. And something that she keeps pointing out is that actually we need to be exercising right now, but not stressing the body too much, because over exercise, the sort of hard training you might do in normal times actually reduces your immune system. And so we want to be doing like medium exercise, not hard exercise at the moment, because hard exercise leaves you more prone to getting ill, whereas medium exercise is just very good for you right now. And to be aware of that, and taking rest days as well. It's hard. I'm walking a virtual Camino, 20 kilometers a day. That's great. I'm doing a lot of walking at the moment. It's good for the head. It's a good time actually to go for a long walk and put in a podcast, put in a Euron Brook or someone like that podcast, and choose some stuff, or the Ayn Rand campus. I think I'm going to start the Peak Off on Communication course. So I think that'd be really good for walking. There are other lectures that aren't of that course, but are on the campus that I've listened to quite a few times. Like Harry Binswanger on emotions is amazing. I've listened to that about 3 or 4 times. I keep saying I'm going to transcribe it, but I don't. But yeah, that's a good de-stressor, going for a walk and listening to a good objectivist podcast. Yoga, fantastic. I think yoga is really underrated, particularly in more rationalistic, potentially rationalistic communities. A fair bit of that tendency in objectivism. I think really getting in touch with your body and knowing that we are a fully integrated being of spirit and body. I think yoga is really important for that in terms of de-stressing, and pranayamic breathing as well. Very powerful. For pranayama is very good for triggering and focusing on the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms you down. Whereas resonance breathing is all about balancing your sympathetic and parasympathetic, which is important as well. So box breathing is balancing the two. And pranayamic breathing is about really emphasizing the parasympathetic, for those of you who like and know about that stuff.
Nikos, anything else?
No, thanks. So I think I broke my Josh record, because today I have 1, 2, 3 pages. So usually it's like 2, but today it's 3.
Nice. So Angela's written the anthem. What's that in relation to? Have I missed something? What about feeling repulsed by people walking past you in the park? I get a bit pissed off with some of the joggers who seem to just slam past you and breathe all over you. That pisses me off a bit.
So Angela says that anthem, she probably refers to the podcast.
I don't know that one. What is that one?
I assume it's the reading group. It's a new reading group by ARI.
Okay.
I have to say, I finished yesterday maybe that kind of made the depressed day because I had a sad end. I finished With the Living, but I'm walking in, so I sympathize with Betty. So for the last many weeks, I'm now going to sound completely paranoid, but you can actually walk in your home. So I can do like 20 up, 20 down. But if you have a very beautiful book, and from both sides, my home has a nice view, although it's actually small. So Betty, if you're repulsed by people who are irresponsible outside, and there are many of these people, you can do it. You can walk, or sometimes I do even light jogging inside as a warm up for my actual training. So if you have even some like 6-7 meters, it's doable. There was this guy, I think, who ran a marathon in his roof.
Betty says, I'm feeling hedonistic, like we're all going to die, so eat some cake while we can. Okay. If you're feeling hedonistic, ask what's the thinking that's driving that, and is it true we're all going to die, so eat some cake while we can? Well, the stats seem to show that we're definitely not all going to die. Maybe you could just eat some cake because you like cake. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad the chat is very lively, and I understand that people are less comfortable. We've done these for the past few weeks, so we're now realizing people are less comfortable asking live questions. So we'll take chat questions when we can, but still, I hope people will ask live questions in the future. Monday, 2 days from now, we will be back with Dr. Andrew Bernstein, and then on Wednesday, we have Nikos, we have writer Emily Hill, and Telegraph columnist, Sunday Telegraph columnist Zoe Strimple. And the topic for that is romance under lockdown. So, and those are not yet posted on the London Ayn Rand meetup at this moment, but they are happening Monday at 7, Wednesday at 7, and Josh will be back next Saturday at 7. So thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks Josh for that awesome presentation, and see you all soon.